There is a particular kind of exhaustion that perfectionism creates, one that most people never talk about because from the outside it looks like ambition, it looks like high standards, it looks like someone who simply cares deeply about the quality of their work, the quality of their relationships, the quality of their life. But if you have ever found yourself redoing something for the fifth time, not because you wanted it to be better, but because you were terrified it wasn't good enough, then you already know what we are really talking about. We are not talking about excellence. We are talking about fear. We are talking about self-doubt that has learned to dress itself up so beautifully that even you stopped recognizing it for what it is. Perfectionism is one of the most sophisticated psychological defense mechanisms the human mind has ever constructed. And what makes it so powerful and so quietly painful is that it works both ways. It protects you from criticism by making sure there is nothing left to criticize. And at the same time, it reinforces the very belief it is trying to protect you from, that you are not enough. That without perfect performance, without flawless output, without constant achievement, you have no real value. The perfectionism does not silence the self-doubt. It just gives the self-doubt somewhere to hide. To understand why this happens, we have to go back, not necessarily to one dramatic moment, but to a pattern. For most people who struggle with perfectionism rooted in self-doubt, the origin lies in early experiences where love, approval, or safety felt conditional. Maybe you grew up in a household where praise came almost exclusively when you performed well, when you got the good grade, when you behaved perfectly, when you made the adults around you proud. Or maybe the environment was unpredictable, and doing everything right felt like the only way to manage the chaos. Maybe you were compared to siblings, to peers, to some invisible ideal of what you were supposed to be. And slowly, quietly, your developing mind drew a conclusion that felt entirely logical at the time. I am valued for what I do, not for who I am. That belief is where self-doubt is born. And that belief is what perfectionism spends a lifetime trying to outrun. The way this plays out in adulthood is remarkably consistent, even if the details look different from person to person. You might be the one who cannot submit a project until it has been reviewed 17 times, even when you know, rationally, clearly, that it is ready. You might be the one who avoids starting things altogether, because if you never begin, you never have to face the possibility of failing. That particular expression of perfectionism is called procrastination, and it confuses people because it looks like laziness when it is actually the opposite. It is a person so terrified of not being good enough that they would rather do nothing than risk the proof. Or you might be the one who finishes things, who achieves things, who ticks every box on every list, and still feels hollow afterward because the moment the achievement is done, the self-doubt surfaces again and whispers, "But was it really enough? Was it really that good? Could someone else have done it better?" This is the cruelest loop of perfectionism-driven self-doubt. The achievement never lands. The reassurance never sticks. You climb the mountain, and instead of feeling the summit, you are already scanning the horizon for the next mountain you need to climb in order to finally feel okay about yourself. The goalpost is always moving because the goalpost was never really about the goal. It was always about the fear underneath it. Relationships become complicated terrain for the perfectionist who carries hidden self-doubt. You might hold yourself to impossibly high standards as a partner, a friend, a parent, convinced that if you are not perfect in your love, you will be abandoned. You might over-apologize, people please, or struggle to ask for help because needing help feels like proof of inadequacy. You might find it almost impossible to be vulnerable because vulnerability means showing the unpolished version of yourself, and the unpolished version of yourself is exactly what you have been trying to hide your entire life. The tragic irony is that the very closeness you long for, the kind of love that feels safe and real and unconditional, is blocked by the wall you built to protect yourself from feeling unlovable. And then there is the inner voice, the internal critic that perfectionism feeds and sharpens every single day. Most people who live with this pattern describe it the same way. a voice that is never satisfied, never quiet, always ready with a reason why the thing you just did was not quite good enough, why you should have done more, should have been more, should have known better. What is important to understand psychologically is that this voice is not your voice. It is an internalized voice, often from early caregivers, teachers, or systems that you absorbed so completely it began to feel like your own thoughts. It does not feel like a memory, it feels like truth. And that is what makes it so hard to argue with. But here is what the research and the clinical work and, most importantly, the lived experience of thousands of people tells us. That voice can be changed, not silenced overnight, but changed, examined, questioned, gradually, painstakingly, lovingly rewritten. The first step is the one that feels the most counterintuitive. It is not to try harder or set better goals or achieve your way out of self-doubt. It is to stop, to get still enough to look at the perfectionism not as a strength to be proud of, but as a signal worth getting curious about. When you feel that familiar tightening, the compulsion to redo, to over-prepare, to hold back until it is perfect, instead of following it automatically, you can start to ask, what am I actually afraid of right now? What do I believe will happen if this is not perfect? And is that belief true? This kind of self-inquiry is not comfortable. It asks you to sit with the self-doubt directly instead of hiding behind the perfectionism. But it is also where the real shift begins. Because once you can see the fear underneath the behavior loses some of its power over you. You are no longer just a perfectionist on autopilot. You are a person who is beginning to understand themselves, and that understanding is the beginning of freedom. Self-compassion is not a soft or peripheral concept here. It is clinically, neurologically significant. When we treat ourselves with the same gentleness we would offer a friend who was struggling, we regulate our nervous system differently. We move out of threat mode. We become capable of learning, of growing, of taking the kinds of imperfect action that real life actually requires. Research on vulnerability and self-compassion, alongside the broader field of attachment theory, all points in the same direction. You do not heal self-doubt by achieving more. You heal it by slowly, carefully building a relationship with yourself that does not depend on performance. This is the work that takes time, and it is okay that it takes time. You spent years, maybe decades, learning to doubt yourself quietly and achieve loudly. Unlearning that is not a weekend project. It is a practice. Some days it will feel like you have finally broken through, and other days the old voice will be back, louder than ever. That is not failure. That is how healing actually moves. Not in a straight line, but in widening circles that gradually include more of who you are. You are allowed to be a work in progress. You are allowed to submit the imperfect draft, to show up without having everything figured out, to take up space in your relationships without performing for it. The version of you that exists beneath the perfectionism, uncertain, tender, still figuring it out, is not your flaw. It is your humanity, and it has always been enough.